It's the ACC versus the Big 12 right here on Mark Rogers TV. If you have caught my favorite off-season project in the past, you know that it's comparing the conferences, taking the results from the previous season and putting them in perspective. So I seed the teams and then I look at the results of the matchups over the course of the regular season, and especially with most of the Power 5 conferences playing in bowl season, take all those results and make out a formula. We will do that. That's an objective process, of course, that we will undertake in the next few weeks. This is a fun little exercise that's very subjective, but it's still a fun exercise, and I'd like to match up all the conferences, stack up the seeding. So this isn't my rankings of who is the best team in the ACC, who's second best. This is what the seedings say based on conference record, head-to-head, overall record. And then if all that matches up, which it typically doesn't, I think it may have happened one time in one conference in the Power 5, then I decide who had the best season. But it's basically seeded. So is Florida State better than Louisville? Well, they played early in the season. Louisville was the much better team. Maybe the Seminoles are now. And though they are fourth-seeded in the ACC. So the other issue that we have in matching up the ACC and the Big 12 is obviously we've got 14 teams in the ACC and we've got 10 teams in the Big 12. So we've got to toss 4 teams, unfortunately. Hate to do that. And the way we did that so it's fair is that we went 2 teams, then we knocked out a team in the ACC and so forth, and it was completely balanced. So you knock out Virginia Tech, the 3 seed, Miami, North Carolina State, and Boston College. So next time against the Big 10 or the SEC, you will get to participate North Carolina State, BC, Miami, and Virginia Tech. The other portion of this that I'm going to do that's been different than what I've done in the past is that I'm going to play 10 games between these teams. So it's difficult to determine if Florida State and Ohio State play, for example, who's going to win that game. Michigan, Florida State played a 1-point game. If they play 10 times, is it 5-5? Who knows what the answer is, but we're going to take a guess at it. So I wanted to play 10 games instead of just saying who would win 1 game, because obviously some matchups are lopsided and some matchups very competitive. All right, let's go through it. Clemson and Oklahoma. We saw this matchup in the college football playoff last season. Clemson, the much better team. They just won the national championship. Oklahoma dominated the Big 12. They played a decent Auburn team, dominated them in the second half, but I believe Clemson is a pretty significantly superior team in this matchup, and they win 8 out of 10 meetings. Louisville, Oklahoma State. We saw a Cardinals team that was extremely strong in the first half of the season. Top 5, top 10 team, not so much down the stretch. We're going to rank them and look at the matchups based on how the teams finished the season. If they played today, you bring back all the guys going to the NFL draft and you play today. Louisville, Oklahoma State, tough matchup to determine. Oklahoma State looked very impressive in the bowl showing against Colorado. That was really their one shining moment. I still like Louisville in a 6-4 margin. Florida State, West Virginia. The Mountaineers didn't show much against Miami, which is not as good as Florida State. The Seminoles looked great against Michigan. I don't want to knee-jerk react to the results of the bowl games. It's one game. Sure, it tells us a lot because you're playing a like-seeded team in another conference, but it's not necessarily the end-all, be-all. And some teams played better or worse than what their track record shows us. So Florida State defeats West Virginia 8-2. Based on the bowl results, it would be 10-0, but that wouldn't happen most likely. North Carolina, Kansas State, interesting matchup with the number 5 seed. The 5 seed out of the ACC matching up with the 5 seed, of course, in the Big 12. Kansas State looking impressive against Texas A&M. In bowl play, North Carolina loses on the last play to Stanford. I like the Tar Heels in this matchup with more firepower, 6-4. Pitt, TCU, the Panthers took a stumble in postseason play. We know what they're capable of. Clemson, Penn State, we know what they're capable of, but they were still an 8-5 football team. They take on TCU. The Horned Frogs finish at 6-7. That's a 7-3 matchup in those 10 meetings. Georgia Tech taking on Texas. I believe Texas might be the first team in this lineup that has more talent than its opposition in the ACC, but Georgia Tech, a more cohesive football team that went 9-4 against a pretty marginal schedule. But Texas shows us in spots how good they can be, in spots how horrible they can be. Kansas game, 6-4, Yellow Jackets. Wake and Texas Tech, difficult matchup to determine here. Wake is very underrated. We saw that in the Temple game in postseason play, in which they dominated the last 3 quarters of that game, won by 8 points. And I certainly loved Wake getting 12 points in that game. Wake, Texas Tech, the Demon Deacons underrated. They win 6-4. Syracuse, Baylor, finally won for the Big 12. Not difficult to determine here. It's kind of strange to see that Baylor would be that low ranked, but based on the seedings, that's where Baylor stacks up. They won their first 6. They lost 6 after that, so they finished 3-6, I believe, in the Big 12. Looked tremendous in the bowl game against Boise State, so we take that into consideration. Syracuse loses this one 7-3, chalk one up for the Big 12. Virginia and Iowa State went through the results, couldn't really determine anything conclusive there. 5-5 tie. And finally, Duke, a much better team than Kansas. Kansas, awful, but they did jump up against Texas. They did play over the last couple of years the likes of TCU close and some other foes of quality in the Big 12. An Oklahoma State game 2 years ago. There was another close matchup they had with someone in the Big 12 this year. So Duke's not certainly formidable this season, but they win that matchup 8-2. So it's not looking too good for the Big 12 here. 100 matchups, 100 games they're playing. The ACC wins 63. In terms of the matchups head-to-head, it's 8-1-1. I believe this is completely subjective. Obviously, this is not an objective process. I just threw it out there for discussion. Let's talk it up, as we always do, right here on Mark Rogers TV.